I'm Jordan Matthews, 34 years old, and I never thought I'd be the person who sent his own sister to prison. My grandmother was everything to me, my mentor, my support, my rock. When she passed away last year, I was devastated. But what came next destroyed our family completely. My sister Rachel forged Grandma's will, and when I discovered the truth, I made the hardest decision of my life. Now my parents are financially ruined, my sister's going to prison, and I'm left wondering if I did the right thing. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Hit that like button and subscribe to follow my journey through this family nightmare. Growing up in the suburbs of Grand Rapids, Michigan, my childhood was mostly typical American middle class. Our neighborhood had tree-lined streets, decent public schools, and community barbecues during summer. My sister Rachel came along when I was 3, and initially, I was thrilled to have a sibling. Those early years were filled with the usual shenanigans, building forts in the living room, riding bikes around the block, and occasional squabbles over toys. But as we grew older, distinct patterns started to emerge. While I saved my allowance for weeks to buy a new video game, Rachel would spend hers immediately and then somehow convince our parents she needed more for school supplies. When I was 12 and she was 9, I caught her taking money from my dresser drawer. Instead of disciplining her, my parents simply replaced what she took and told me to hide my money better. This was my first lesson in how differently they treated us. Our parents, Thomas and Margaret Matthews, were hard-working people with traditional values. Dad was a high school history teacher who coached baseball on the side, and Mom worked as a nurse at the local hospital. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they provided a stable home and emphasized education and responsibility. At least that was the message I received. Rachel seemed to operate under a different set of rules. When she crashed her bicycle riding recklessly, they bought her a new one. When I damaged mine, I had to earn money mowing lawns to pay for repairs. Your sister is more sensitive, Mom would explain when I pointed out the disparity. She needs more support. This excuse followed Rachel through her entire life, creating a monster of entitlement that would eventually destroy our family. Grandmother Eleanor was the true backbone of our family. After Grandpa died when I was just 5, she remained fiercely independent in her little craftsman house across town. Every Sunday, we'd visit for dinner, and those were the highlights of my childhood. Grandma Eleanor had been a bookkeeper for a local manufacturing company for 40 years, and she understood the value of money and hard work better than anyone I knew. Save a third, spend a third, give a third, she'd tell me, pressing a $5 bill into my hand when my parents weren't looking. That's the secret to a good life, Jordan. She taught me to balance a checkbook when I was 10, explained compound interest when I was 12, and helped me open my first investment account when I was 16. These lessons shaped my future. Rachel, however, found Grandma's financial lectures boring. While I sat at the kitchen table learning about budgeting, Rachel would be in the living room, watching television or talking on the phone. Grandma tried with her too, but Rachel would roll her eyes or make excuses to leave the room. Some people have to learn their lessons the hard way, Grandma would say with a sigh, watching Rachel walk away. Despite the obvious differences in our relationship with her, Grandma Eleanor never explicitly favored me over Rachel. She attended both our school events, equally remembered our birthdays, with similar gifts, and spoke of us with the same grandmother's pride to her friends. But the connection between Grandma and me was special. We understood each other on a fundamental level that Rachel and our parents never seemed to share. By the time I graduated high school, my path was clear. Following Grandma's advice, I studied finance at Michigan State, worked part-time throughout college, and graduated with minimal student loans. I secured an entry-level position at a financial advisory firm in Detroit, lived frugally, and steadily built my career and savings. Within 10 years, I had my own condo, a healthy investment portfolio, and had worked my way up to senior financial advisor with a stable of loyal clients. Rachel took a dramatically different route. She attended 3 different colleges, but never graduated from any of them. She changed majors 5 times, took semesters off, and accumulated significant student debt with nothing to show for it. Every few months brought a new crisis. Her car broke down, her roommate stole from her, her landlord was unfair, her boyfriend left her penniless. Each time our parents rushed to her rescue, draining their modest savings and postponing their own dreams. You don't understand what it's like for her dad would say when I questioned their enabling. She's trying her best. But from my perspective, Rachel's best seemed to consist of finding new ways to avoid responsibility while maximizing what she could extract from our parents and various boyfriends. By the time we reached our 30s, the contrast couldn't have been starker. I was financially secure, had a long-term relationship with my girlfriend Alexis, and was considering settling down. Rachel was working retail jobs sporadically, living in an apartment our parents subsidized, and cycling through relationships with increasingly questionable men. Grandmother Eleanor watched this all unfold with concern. Now, in her late 80s, she remained sharp as ever, but her health was beginning to fail. During my weekly visits, she would occasionally mention her will and financial affairs. "I've worked hard all my life, Jordan," she told me during one such conversation. "I've been careful with my money, and I want it to do good when I'm gone, not just be wasted." She had accumulated a modest but significant estate, her house worth about $300,000 retirement savings, of roughly $200,000, and some other investments. Not a fortune by any means, but substantial for a woman who had worked a middle-class job her entire life. "I know you'll be smart with whatever comes your way," she added, patting my hand. "As for your sister," she trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. At the time I assumed she meant the inheritance would be split equally, but she worried about Rachel squandering her portion. I had no idea how prophetic her concerns would prove to be. The last months of Grandma's life were difficult. Congestive heart failure left her weak and often breathless. I visited more frequently sometimes, just sitting quietly beside her bed while she rested. Rachel rarely came always, with excuses about work or transportation issues. Our parents visited regularly, but seemed uncomfortable with the reality of Grandma's decline. None of us was prepared for how quickly everything would unravel after her passing, or how one malicious act would expose the fault lines in our family that had been there all along. Grandma Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in October. The hospice nurse called me first, knowing how close we were. I sat in my car outside my office for nearly an hour, unable to drive, just remembering her smile, her wisdom, her unwavering support. When I finally composed myself enough to call my parents, Mom answered and broke down immediately. Dad took the phone, and in his stoic way, began making practical arrangements. I offered to contact Rachel. "She's not picking up," I told Dad, after my 5th attempt to reach my sister. "I'll try again later." "She's probably at work," he replied, though we both knew Rachel had been between jobs for months. The funeral was held 3 days later at the small Methodist church Grandma had attended for decades. The sanctuary overflowed with people whose lives she had touched. Former colleagues, neighbors, church friends, even the young couple who bought groceries for her when walking became difficult. Rachel arrived 15 minutes late, slipping into the family pew, wearing sunglasses and clothes that seemed inappropriate for the occasion. "Sorry," she whispered, not sounding sorry at all. "Traffic was terrible." I nodded, too grief-stricken to argue, and returned my attention to the pastor's eulogy. Throughout the service, I found myself looking at the framed photograph of Grandma placed beside her casket, a recent picture showing her with the gentle smile that had comforted me throughout my life. The weight of her absence felt crushing. After the burial, everyone gathered at my parents' house. Platters of food arrived from church members and neighbors, creating a buffer against the raw grief. I found myself telling stories about Grandma sharing her wisdom with others who had loved her. Rachel stayed for barely an hour before claiming she had a headache and needed to leave. 3 days after the funeral, Martin Greenberg, Grandma's attorney, called to schedule the reading of the will. "It's just a formality," he explained. But Eleanor was very specific about wanting the family together for this. We gathered in Martin's wood-paneled office the following Monday. My parents, Rachel, who arrived late again, and me. I expected a straightforward process. Grandma had mentioned several times that she intended to divide her estate equally between her 2 grandchildren, with specific provisions for some family heirlooms and charitable donations. Martin cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses before beginning. This last will and testament being of sound, mind, and body. He read from the document before him. As he continued, I felt a growing sense of confusion. The will left Grandma's house, and the bulk of her savings to Rachel, with only $20,000 and a few personal items designated for me. The remaining assets were split between my parents and two charities. There must be some mistake, I said when Martin finished reading. This doesn't sound like what Grandma intended at all. Martin looked uncomfortable. This is the document Eleanor signed 2 months ago, he said, turning the will around to show us the signature page. It supersedes any previous versions. I stared at the signature. It looked like Grandma's handwriting, but something felt off. I glanced at Rachel, who was studying her fingernails with unusual intensity. I'm as surprised as you are, Rachel said, noticing my gaze. But obviously Grandma knew what she was doing. The slight smile that flickered across her face triggered an alarm bell in my mind. The drive to my parents' house for dinner afterward was tense. Dad kept saying we should respect Grandma's wishes, whatever they were. Mom seemed confused but unwilling to question the will's validity. Rachel rode with them, while I followed in my own car, thoughts racing. During dinner, Rachel couldn't stop talking about her plans for Grandma's house. I might sell it and use the money for a fresh start, she mused, helping herself to a second glass of wine. Or maybe I'll move in for a while. The neighborhood has really improved. I pushed my food around my plate, appetite gone. Don't you think it's strange? I finally asked. Grandma never mentioned changing her will. She always said she wanted to treat us equally. People change their minds, Rachel replied with a shrug. Maybe she felt sorry for me, since you're doing so well, and I've had such bad luck. The conversation moved on, but I couldn't let it go. After dinner, I called Martin and asked to meet privately the next day. Something doesn't feel right about this, I told him in his office. Grandma would have told me if she'd made such a dramatic change to her will. We talked about her estate planning regularly. Martin looked troubled. Legally, it's a properly executed document. But between us, I was surprised too. Eleanor came in with this pre-drafted document about 2 months ago. She seemed different, less engaged than usual. When I asked if she wanted to discuss the changes, she said it was already exactly what she wanted. That doesn't sound like her at all, I insisted. She believed in fairness above all else. Look, Jordan Martin said carefully. I've known your family for years. If you have concerns about the will's authenticity, there are ways to investigate. But I need to caution you. Challenging a will can tear families apart. I think something's already torn my family apart, I replied grimly. That evening, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandma's signature, about Rachel's smug smile, about the timing of the new will during Grandma's final decline. Around 3 in the morning, I made a decision. I would investigate quietly before making any accusations. First, I contacted several document examiners, eventually finding one with experience in contested wills. Then I remembered Grandma mentioning a safe deposit box at her bank. I hadn't seen a key for it among her personal effects, which seemed strange. The next day, I visited her bank and inquired about the box. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Matthews, the manager said. Your grandmother was a valued customer for many years. Regarding the safe deposit box, our records show it was accessed about 2 months ago. By my grandmother? I asked. The manager checked the log. No, by Rachel Matthews. She had authorization on the account. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. 2 months ago, the same time frame as the new will, I asked if I could access the box as an executor, but since Rachel was named executor in the new will, I had no legal standing yet. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed with a text from the document examiner, confirming our appointment for the following day. What had started as a vague suspicion was quickly becoming a certainty. Rachel had done something unthinkable, and I needed proof to make it right. The offices of Bradford Forensic Document Services occupied a small suite in a downtown office building. Dr. Abigail Bradford herself met me at reception, a serious woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. I had brought the copy of the will Martin had provided, along with several cards and letters from Grandma that contained her authentic signature. I understand your concerns, Dr. Bradford said, after I explained the situation. Family will contests are unfortunately common, but we approach each case objectively. For the next 2 hours, she examined the documents under various lighting conditions and magnifications, taking detailed notes and photographs. I sat nervously watching, alternating between hoping I was wrong and fearing I was right. Mr. Matthews, she finally said, removing her glasses. Based on my preliminary analysis, there are several concerning anomalies in this signature. She pointed out subtle differences. Pressure points that didn't match Grandma's usual writing pattern. Hesitation marks indicating someone trying to copy rather than naturally sign, and inconsistencies in certain letter formations. Additionally, she continued, the ink analysis suggests this signature was created with a different pen than the one used for the date beside it, which is unusual in standard will executions where both are typically signed at the same time. My stomach tightened. So, it's a forgery. I can't state that conclusively without examining the original document and performing more tests, she cautioned. But there are sufficient irregularities to merit further investigation. She promised a preliminary report within a week and recommended I consult with an attorney specializing in probate disputes. As I left her office, I felt sick. The evidence was pointing toward the unthinkable. My own sister had forged our grandmother's will. My next stop was back to Grandma's bank. This time I spoke with the manager about any unusual activity in her accounts prior to her death. I can't provide specific details without proper legal authority, he explained. But I can tell you that we did flag some unusual withdrawals in your grandmother's account review. Nothing that triggered fraud alerts, but larger than her typical patterns. When did these occur? I asked. Over the past several months of her life, he replied carefully. The most recent, about 6 weeks before her passing. This aligned with the timeline I was piecing together. I thanked him and left, making a note to obtain proper legal access to these records once I had more evidence. That evening, I received a call from Martin. Jordan, something unusual has happened. I was reviewing Eleanor's client files, and I discovered notes about a previous will that should have been in her file. It's missing. What did the note say? I asked, heart racing. Just that she executed a will 3 years ago, with the standard provisions she had discussed, equal distribution between you and Rachel, specific bequests to your parents and donations to her church and the Literacy Foundation. Exactly what she always told me, I confirmed. Martin, I need to ask you something important. Did Rachel ever come to your office alone asking questions about Grandma's will or her assets? A long pause followed. Yes, he finally admitted. About 4 months ago. She said Eleanor had asked her to pick up some information. I didn't provide anything confidential, but I did mention the general structure of the estate plan Eleanor had in place. Thank you for telling me, I said, adding this to my mental timeline. The next breakthrough came unexpectedly. While helping my parents sort through some of Grandma's personal belongings, I found a small notebook tucked inside her Bible. In it, she had kept a simple record of important documents and their locations. One entry caught my eye. Original will, safe deposit box at First National copy with Martin. Dad, I asked carefully. Did Grandma ever mention having a will in her safe deposit box? He looked surprised. Not specifically, but she always kept important documents there. Why? I showed him the notebook entry. I think we need to check that box. The bank told me Rachel accessed it recently. Dad frowned. She probably went with your grandmother. Eleanor was having trouble getting around. Maybe I conceded, not wanting to make accusations yet. But I think we should verify what's there. After some discussion, Dad agreed to go to the bank with me the next day. As Grandma's next of kin, he had the authority to access the box with proper documentation of her death. The bank manager led us to the vault area, checked Dad's identification and the death certificate, then left us in a private room with the contents of the box. Inside, we found several envelopes containing insurance policies, property deeds, and, most importantly, a sealed envelope labeled Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Matthews. With shaking hands, Dad opened it. The document inside was dated 3 years earlier and matched exactly what Martin had described from his notes: an equal distribution between Rachel and me, with specific provisions for family heirlooms and charitable donations. This doesn't make sense, Dad said, comparing the dates with the will Martin had read. Why would she create a completely different will without telling anyone? I don't think she did, I said, quietly showing him Dr. Bradford's preliminary report, which had arrived that morning. Dad, I think Rachel forged the new will. The color drained from his face. That's a serious accusation, Jordan. Your sister has her problems, but this would be criminal. I know, I replied. That's why I've been investigating carefully. But look at the evidence. The timing, the missing original from Martin's office, the suspicious signature, the unusual bank withdrawals. It all points to Rachel. Dad sat heavily in the chair provided by the bank. We need to talk to your sister before doing anything else. I agreed, though. I had little hope that confronting Rachel would result in a confession. We arranged to meet at my parents' house that evening, telling Rachel we needed to discuss some of Grandma's personal items. When we arrived, Rachel was already there chatting animatedly with Mom about plans to renovate Grandma's house. Her smile faded when she saw our serious expressions. What's going on? She asked as we sat at the dining room table. I placed the original will from the safe deposit box in front of her. We found this today, I said simply. Rachel glanced at it, then looked away. So Grandma made a new will later. You know that. Did she? I asked. Or did you create that will yourself, after taking the original from Martin's office? Her face flushed. That's ridiculous. How dare you accuse me of something like that? I laid out the evidence piece by piece, the forensic analysis of the signature, the timeline of her visits to the lawyer, and banked the missing original, the unusual withdrawals from Grandma's accounts. You're just jealous because Grandma loved me more in the end, she snapped, but her voice wavered. Rachel, Dad said gently. If there's something you need to tell us, now is the time. We can help you if you're in trouble. I don't need help, she insisted, standing up so abruptly, her chair tipped over. This is a witch hunt because Jordan can't accept that he wasn't Grandma's favorite after all. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Mom began to cry, while Dad sat in stunned silence. What do we do now? Mom finally asked. I took a deep breath. I think we need to report this to the authorities. This isn't just about the inheritance, it's elder abuse and fraud. No, Dad said firmly. She's your sister. We handle this as a family. Dad, she stole hundreds of thousands of dollars through criminal means. She took advantage of Grandma when she was ill and vulnerable. How do we handle that as a family? The debate continued for hours. My parents wanted to believe Rachel could be reasoned with, that she would admit her wrongdoing, and we could find a private solution. I knew better. Rachel had never faced consequences for her actions, and without intervention, she never would. 3 days later, after Rachel refused to return our calls or meet again, I made the hardest decision of my life. I took my evidence to the county prosecutor's office and filed a formal complaint. The wheels of justice moved more quickly than I expected. Within 2 weeks of my meeting with the prosecutor, a detective contacted me for a formal statement. I provided copies of all the evidence I had gathered, including Dr. Bradford's now complete forensic report, the original will bank records we had obtained through proper channels, and statements from Martin and the bank manager. Rachel was arrested on a Tuesday morning at the coffee shop where she had recently started working. The charges were serious forgery, fraud, theft, and elder exploitation. I learned about the arrest from Dad, who called me at work, his voice breaking. They took her away in handcuffs, Jordan. In front of everyone. I closed my office door for privacy. I'm sorry it came to this, but she gave us no choice. There's always a choice when it comes to family, he replied before hanging up. That evening I drove to my parents' house knowing I needed to face them. Mom opened the door but didn't embrace me as she usually did. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and she looked as if she had aged years in a single day. Dad sat in his recliner staring blankly at the television, though it wasn't turned on. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations. How could you? Mom finally asked. Your own sister. Mom, she committed serious crimes, I explained for what felt like the 100th time. She took advantage of Grandma when she was sick and vulnerable. She stole what would have rightfully been divided among all of us. She made a mistake, Dad insisted. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, I countered. It was a calculated series of actions over months. She visited Martin to learn about the will, stole the original, created a fraudulent replacement, somehow got access to Grandma's accounts, and was planning to take everything. She's still your sister, Mom said, as if that single fact outweighed everything else. Family protects family. Grandma was family too, I reminded them. Doesn't she deserve justice? The conversation devolved from there with accusations flying. Mom claimed I had always been jealous of the attention Rachel received. Dad suggested my financial success had made me cold and unforgiving. I pointed out their decades of enabling Rachel had created this situation in the first place. We were interrupted by a call from the public defender assigned to Rachel's case informing my parents about her arraignment the next morning. The conversation shifted to immediate practicalities. What time to arrive at the courthouse? What to expect during the hearing? The arraignment was brief but devastating. Rachel appeared in an orange jumpsuit looking small and frightened. When the judge set bail at $250,000, Mom gasped audibly. She's not a flight risk, Your Honor, the public defender argued. She has strong community ties and no prior record. The charges involve significant financial crimes and elder abuse, the judge replied firmly. The bail stands. Outside the courtroom, my parents huddled with the public defender, while I stood awkwardly apart, now clearly viewed as the enemy. I overheard snippets of their conversation, property as collateral and bail bondsman. Dad approached me as we left the courthouse. We're going to bail her out, he stated, not asking for my opinion. How? That's $250,000. We're putting up the house, he replied, not meeting my eyes. My stomach dropped. Dad, no. Your house is paid off. It's your financial security. What would you have us do? Leave her in jail? Mom interjected, her voice sharp with anger. The trial could be months away, I pointed out. And given the evidence, she'll likely be convicted anyway. You'd be risking everything for nothing. She's not nothing. She's our daughter, Dad said with finality. I tried again. At least talk to a financial advisor before making this decision. I can help with bail another way. We don't want your help, Mom said coldly. You've done enough. Over the next week, I watched helplessly as my parents mortgaged their fully paid home of 30 years to secure Rachel's bail. They worked with a bail bondsman who took a non-refundable fee of $25,000, money they withdrew from their retirement account, incurring taxes and penalties. Rachel was released 5 days after her arrest. She immediately moved back into my parents' house, claiming she couldn't return to her apartment because everyone was talking about her. Rather than looking for work to help with legal expenses, she spent her days watching television and browsing online shopping sites. The family division grew wider. Extended family members took sides, some supporting my decision to report the crime, others condemning me for turning against my sister. My uncle Robert, Dad's brother, called to tell me he understood my position. Someone had to stand up for what's right, he said. Eleanor deserved better. His support meant more than he could know. About 3 weeks after Rachel's release, I received a concerned call from my mother's friend Susan. I'm worried about your parents, she confided. I saw Rachel at the mall yesterday with several shopping bags from expensive stores. When I mentioned it to your mom, she got very defensive. I thanked Susan for letting me know and decided to investigate. A quick check of my parents' credit card statements, which Dad had previously shared with me for financial planning, showed thousands of dollars of new charges at clothing stores, restaurants, and beauty salons. Rachel was burning through my parents' limited resources while awaiting trial for financial crimes. When I confronted my parents about this discovery, Dad admitted they had given Rachel their credit card for emergencies. Mom insisted Rachel needed new clothes for court appearances and meetings with her lawyer. Neither would acknowledge the obvious. Rachel was taking advantage of them yet again. The situation deteriorated further when Rachel convinced my parents to fire the public defender and hire Gregory Walton, a flashy defense attorney known for his expensive suits and media appearances. His retainer alone was $50,000. Money my parents scraped together by taking a cash advance on their newly acquired mortgage. He says he can get all the charges dropped. Dad explained when I expressed horror at this development. The public defender just wanted her to plead guilty. Because she is guilty, I pointed out, exasperated. We have irrefutable evidence. Gregory says the evidence was obtained improperly. Mom countered, parroting what was clearly the lawyer's sales pitch. He says you had no right to access Grandma's safe deposit box. I left that day feeling a mixture of anger and profound sadness. My family was being torn apart, and my parents were being financially ruined, all because they couldn't recognize Rachel for what she truly was. As the weeks passed and the case moved toward trial, the financial strain on my parents became increasingly evident. Their once immaculate home showed signs of neglect. The lawn unmowed, minor repairs ignored, the refrigerator sparsely stocked. Pride prevented them from admitting their difficulties, but I noticed Mom had stopped getting her hair done and Dad was wearing shirts with frayed collars. Meanwhile, Rachel continued her life of leisure, now supplemented by the false confidence provided by her expensive attorney. Gregory Walton had promised miracles, but delivered little beyond delays and motions that were routinely denied by the judge. Each court appearance required additional preparation fees that drained my parents' resources further. Despite our strained relationship, I attempted to help by sending grocery deliveries and anonymously paying some of their utility bills. When Dad discovered my intervention, he called me, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "We don't need your charity, Jordan." "It's not charity, Dad. It's family helping family. Something you taught me." "Not like this," he insisted. "We're managing fine." But they weren't managing fine. Through my connections at the bank, I discreetly learned they had missed their first mortgage payment. The new monthly obligation of $1,500, after 30 years of living mortgage-free, was proving impossible to meet with their fixed retirement income, especially with the additional burden of Rachel's expenses. I arranged a meeting with Assistant District Attorney Caroline Wells, who was prosecuting Rachel's case. I needed to understand exactly what my parents were up against, and whether there was any possibility of resolving the case without a lengthy trial. "The evidence is overwhelming," Mr. Matthews ADA Wells explained in her no-nonsense manner. "The forensic report on the forged signature is conclusive. The bank records show your sister withdrew over $30,000 from your grandmother's accounts in the months before her death. We have surveillance footage of her entering and leaving the attorney's office on the day the original will disappeared." "Has she been offered a plea deal?" I asked. "Yes, multiple times. Your sister could plead guilty to reduce charges of forgery and elder financial abuse. She'd serve probably 2 to 3 years, instead of the 5 to 7 she's facing, with a conviction at trial." And she refused. Her attorney returns each offer with increasingly outlandish counteroffers. Probation only, no restitution, sealed records. It's not going to happen. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. My parents have mortgaged their home to bail her out and pay for this attorney, who's clearly giving them false hope. Ada Wells's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry about your parents' situation, but your sister committed serious crimes. The evidence indicates this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated scheme targeting a vulnerable, elderly woman. The state takes elder abuse very seriously." As I left her office, I felt a renewed sense of certainty that I'd done the right thing in reporting Rachel, mixed with anguish over my parents' situation. They had worked their entire lives to build financial security, and Rachel was destroying it all with her selfishness. That evening I received a text from Mom that both surprised and concerned me. "Can we meet tomorrow? Just us. Don't tell your father." We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. Mom looked exhausted, the lines around her eyes deeper than I remembered. She ordered coffee but just held the mug without drinking. "We're in trouble, Jordan," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The mortgage payment, Rachel's attorney, the credit cards. It's all too much." I reached across the table to take her hand. "I know, Mom. I've been worried about you both." "Your father won't admit it," she continued. "He's so proud. But we can't keep going like this. Rachel keeps saying once she's acquitted she'll help us, but deep down you know that's not going to happen." I finished gently. Tears filled her eyes. The prosecutor sent another plea offer. 2 years with possibility of parole after 18 months. Gregory says we shouldn't take it that he can win at trial, but he wants another $30,000 for expert witnesses. I took a deep breath. Mom, Rachel is going to be convicted. The evidence is irrefutable. This lawyer is taking advantage of your desperation. She dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "I'm beginning to see that. But what do we do now? We've already spent so much. First, stop giving Rachel money for anything beyond absolute necessities. Second, consider letting her take the plea deal. It's the best outcome possible, given the circumstances. Third, let me help you with your financial situation. Mom looked torn. Your father would never accept your help. He feels like you betrayed the family. Then don't tell him it's from me, I suggested. Say you found a financial assistance program or renegotiated the mortgage terms. She seemed to consider this. I'll think about it. But Jordan, you have to understand how hard this is for us. Rachel is our daughter too. I know, Mom. And I never wanted any of this to happen. But Rachel made her choices, and now we're all living with the consequences. As I drove home from our meeting, I felt a glimmer of hope that my mother at least was beginning to see reality. But that hope was tempered by the knowledge that Rachel continued to manipulate the situation, and my father remained firmly under her spell. The following week brought another disturbing development. The prosecutor's office informed me they had discovered evidence of additional financial misconduct. Rachel had apparently opened credit cards in Grandma's name during her final months and charged thousands of dollars in personal expenses. This new evidence would be added to the existing charges, strengthening the case against her, but also increasing the potential sentence. When I called my mother to inform her of this development, she sounded defeated. Your father still believes she's being framed somehow, but I found receipts in her room for designer clothes purchased with a credit card in your grandmother's name. I can't deny the truth anymore. Will you convince Dad to let her take the plea deal? I'm trying, she sighed. But he thinks this expensive lawyer is our only hope. We had to take a cash advance on another credit card just to make the mortgage payment this month. The financial house of cards was collapsing around my parents, and I felt powerless to stop it. My relationship with my father had deteriorated to the point where he wouldn't take my calls, and Rachel continued to live in their home, bleeding them dry while facing the near certainty of prison. As the trial date approached, Gregory Walton finally admitted to my parents what the prosecutor had been saying all along. The evidence was overwhelming, and Rachel would almost certainly be convicted on all counts. He suggested for the first time that accepting a plea deal might be the wisest course. But by then, the prosecutor's patience had worn thin, and the latest offer included more jail time than the original proposals. The night before Rachel was scheduled to appear in court to potentially accept a plea deal, she disappeared from my parents' house, taking their car and what little cash they had on hand. For 48 terrifying hours, we thought she had fled, which would have meant the loss of the bail money and my parents' house. But she was found at a casino hotel 200 miles away, having spent her last desperate hours gambling away what she had stolen. This final betrayal opened my father's eyes at last. When Rachel was returned to custody and bail was revoked, he called me for the first time in months. You were right, he said, simply his voice heavy with the weight of acceptance. We should have listened to you from the beginning. The county courthouse was an imposing limestone building, with wide steps and tall columns, designed to intimidate as much as to serve justice. On the first day of Rachel's trial, I arrived early, watching as the morning sun cast long shadows across the entrance. My parents arrived separately, looking worn and defeated. Can we sit together? I asked hesitantly. Dad nodded, his usual robust posture, now stooped with worry. Mom gave me a small smile and took my arm as we entered the courtroom. The proceedings began with the formal reading of charges: forgery, fraud, theft, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. Rachel sat beside her attorney wearing a conservative blue dress that I later learned my parents had purchased for the occasion. She kept her eyes downcast, not once looking in our direction. In her opening statement, Ada Caroline Wells laid out the prosecution's case methodically, like assembling pieces of a puzzle. She described how Rachel had systematically exploited our grandmother's declining health to steal her assets. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, Wells emphasized to the jury. This was a calculated scheme carried out over months, targeting an elderly woman who trusted the defendant implicitly because she was family. Gregory Walton's opening statement attempted to paint Rachel as a misunderstood caregiver who had merely been following Grandma Eleanor's wishes. Eleanor Matthews wanted to provide for her granddaughter, who needed financial support more than her financially successful grandson, he claimed. Even from where I sat, I could see several jurors' skeptical expressions. The prosecution's case unfolded over 3 days, each piece of evidence more damning than the last. Dr. Bradford's testimony about the forged signature was particularly powerful, as she projected magnified images showing the discrepancies between Grandma's authentic signature and the forgery. In my professional opinion, she stated firmly, this signature was not written by Eleanor Matthews but rather by someone attempting to imitate her handwriting. Bank employees testified about the unusual withdrawals and the credit cards opened in Grandma's name. Martin Greenberg described his suspicions about the replacement will and the missing original. Security footage showed Rachel entering and leaving his office building on the day the original disappeared from his files. Throughout the prosecution's case, I watched my sister's posture gradually collapse. The confident facade she had maintained for months crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. By the end of the third day, she looked like a cornered animal darting glances around the courtroom, as if seeking an escape route. When it came time for the defense to present their case, Gregory Walton had little to work with. His primary strategy seemed to be attempting to cast doubt on the chain of custody for some evidence and suggesting that Grandma might have been confused about her intentions for her estate. Rachel took the stand in her own defense, a decision that proved disastrous. Under Walton's friendly questioning, she maintained that Grandma had wanted to change her will to favor Rachel because Jordan didn't need the money, and Grandma felt sorry for me. But, during cross-examination, Ada Wells systematically dismantled Rachel's story. She produced bank records showing Rachel had been in financial trouble for years with mounting debt and a history of failed jobs. She presented text messages Rachel had sent to friends boasting about her upcoming windfall weeks before Grandma's death. Most devastatingly, she revealed credit card charges for luxury items made on Grandma's stolen cards on the very day of her funeral. Miss Matthews Wells asked with quiet intensity, "Do you expect this jury to believe that your grandmother wanted you to buy designer handbags and book spa treatments while her body was being lowered into the ground?" Rachel broke down her testimony, dissolving into contradictory statements and eventually tears. When she left the stand, any hope of acquittal left with her. Then came the moment I had been dreading, my own testimony. As I took the oath, I avoided looking directly at Rachel, focusing instead on the prosecutor and the jury. Mr. Matthews Wells began, "Please describe your relationship with your grandmother." For the next hour, I explained our close bond, her financial wisdom, and her consistent statements about wanting to treat her grandchildren equally. I detailed my discovery of the forged will and the investigation that followed. Throughout my testimony, I strived to remain factual and unemotional, though inside, I was torn apart by the necessity of testifying against my own sister. During cross-examination, Walton attempted to portray me as jealous and vindictive. "Isn't it true that you were angry that your grandmother might have preferred your sister in the end?" "No," I replied steadily. "I was concerned that someone had taken advantage of my grandmother when she was vulnerable. The evidence confirmed those concerns." When I stepped down from the witness stand, I finally allowed myself to look at Rachel. The hatred in her eyes was palpable, but beneath it, I thought I detected something else. The faintest glimmer of shame. The closing arguments were scheduled for the following morning. That night, I met my parents for dinner at a quiet restaurant near their home. "How are you holding up?" I asked, as we picked at our food. "I keep thinking about where we went wrong with her," Mom said, her voice hollow. "Was it something we did? Something we didn't do?" Dad shook his head. "I've been asking myself the same questions. We always tried to help her, to give her what she needed. Maybe that was part of the problem," I suggested gently. "She never had to face consequences." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of family dynamics hanging between us. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Dad finally said, "we want you to know we understand why you did what you did. It wasn't easy for any of us, but it was right." Those words, so long in coming, brought tears to my eyes. The jury began deliberations after lunch the following day. We had expected hours, if not days, of waiting, but they returned with a verdict after only 90 minutes, a bad sign for the defense. On the count of forgery, in the first degree, how do you find? We find the defendant guilty. On the count of fraud, guilty. Elder financial abuse, guilty. The pattern continued through all counts. Rachel stood motionless as the verdicts were read, her face ashen. When the judge ordered her taken into custody pending sentencing, she looked back at our parents with pleading eyes, but the court officers were already leading her away. Outside, the courtroom reporters gathered around Ada Wells, who expressed satisfaction with the verdict and promised to seek significant prison time at sentencing. My parents declined to speak to the media, and we quickly made our way to the parking garage. "What happens now?" Mom asked, as we reached their car. "Sentencing will be in about 4 weeks," I explained. "Based on the charges and state guidelines, she's looking at 5 to 7 years. Dad leaned heavily against the car. "All this, and we still lost our daughter, and our home." "You haven't lost your home yet," I said, "and we'll figure something out." But the reality was stark. The bail money was now forfeited since Rachel had been taken into custody. The expensive defense had drained their savings and maxed out their credit. The mortgage payments they couldn't afford would continue. My once secure parents were now financially devastated at an age when they should have been enjoying retirement. As I watched them drive away, I felt the full weight of what this ordeal had cost us all. Justice had been served, but at a terrible price. The weeks following Rachel's conviction were quiet ones. My parents retreated into themselves, processing their grief and shock in private. I respected their space while making it clear I was available whenever they needed me. Small gestures became our way of rebuilding. Dad calling to ask advice about a car repair, Mom accepting my invitation to lunch, both of them sending a card on my birthday. 3 weeks after the trial, I received an unexpected call from the correctional facility where Rachel was being held awaiting sentencing. She wanted to see me. After some deliberation, I agreed to visit more out of curiosity than forgiveness. The visiting room was stark and institutional, with hard plastic chairs and tables bolted to the floor. Rachel appeared in an orange jumpsuit thinner than I remembered, and without the makeup she typically wore. For a moment, she looked so much like the little girl I had grown up with that my resolve wavered. "Thank you for coming," she said, as we sat across from each other. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't either," I admitted. "Why did you want to see me?" She looked down at her hands picking at a fingernail. "I've had a lot of time to think in here, about what I did, about who I've become." I waited, not making it easier for her. "I did it," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "All of it. The will, the credit cards, everything. And I can't even explain why anymore. It seemed to make sense at the time. You had success, I had nothing. Grandma loved you more. I deserved something for once." "Grandma loved us both." I corrected her. "She wanted us both to have equal shares. You didn't need to steal anything." "I know that now." A tear slipped down her cheek. "The thing is, once I started, I couldn't stop. It was like watching someone else do these terrible things, but it was me all along." We sat in silence for a moment. "Have you told Mom and Dad?" I finally asked. She shook her head. "I'm too ashamed. They mortgaged their house for me, spent everything on my defense, and I knew all along I was guilty." "They need to hear it from you," I told her. "Not for punishment, but for closure, so they can start to heal." "Will you help me?" she asked, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "Will you be there when I tell them?" That simple request, acknowledging her need for my support, rather than just taking it for granted, felt like the first honest interaction we'd had in years. "Yes," I promised. "I'll be there." The meeting with our parents took place the following week. It was painful but necessary, with Rachel finally taking full responsibility for her actions and the devastation they had caused. Mom cried quietly while Dad sat stoically, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. When Rachel apologized for ruining them financially, he finally broke down. "We would have helped you if you'd just asked," he said through tears. "You didn't have to destroy everything." The sentencing hearing came 2 days later. Based on the severity of the crimes and Rachel's belated acceptance of responsibility, the judge imposed a 5-year sentence with possibility of parole after 3 years. As the officers led her away, she looked back at us with a nod of acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness yet on either side, but it was acknowledgement of reality, the first step toward whatever healing might be possible. With Rachel's case concluded, I turned my attention to my parents' financial crisis. They had gone from comfortable retirement to the brink of bankruptcy in less than a year. The forfeited bail money, legal fees, credit card debt, and mortgage had created a perfect storm they couldn't weather alone. "Let me help," I urged during Sunday dinner at their house. "Not as charity, but as family. The way you've always helped me." "We got ourselves into this mess," Dad insisted, pride still evident despite everything. "No, Rachel got you into this mess," I corrected gently. and we're going to get out of it together. After much discussion, they reluctantly agreed to let me help restructure their finances. I paid off the most predatory credit cards negotiated with others for reduced interest rates and created a sustainable budget. Most importantly, I supplemented their monthly income to ensure they could make the mortgage payments and keep their home. This is temporary, I assured Dad when he expressed concern about becoming dependent. Just until you're back on solid ground. Gradually, our family began to heal. The weekly dinners became less strained with conversations that occasionally included laughter again. Mom started tending her garden. Dad rejoined his bowling league, and both began to look forward rather than back. 6 months after Rachel's sentencing, I received a letter from her. She was participating in educational programs in prison and receiving counseling for the first time in her life. "I'm finally understanding why I did what I did," she wrote. "It doesn't excuse anything, but maybe it means I won't be the same person when I get out." I shared the letter with my parents, who had begun their own monthly visits to see Rachel. "She seems different," Mom observed. "More like the daughter we thought we raised." "People can change when they finally face consequences," I replied. "Maybe this is what she needed all along." As the seasons changed, so did our perspectives. What had seemed like an irrevocable tragedy slowly transformed into a painful but necessary correction. Rachel was paying for her crimes. My parents were gradually regaining financial stability, and I was rediscovering my role as a son and brother rather than adversary or savior. The hardest lessons often come from our most painful experiences. I learned that true love sometimes means standing firm when it would be easier to look away. My parents learned that enabling isn't the same as supporting. And Rachel, we hope, learned that actions have consequences that can't be charmed or manipulated away. 2 years into Rachel's sentence, she became eligible for a work release program. By then, my parents had stabilized financially with my help transitioning to occasional rather than regular support. We developed a plan for Rachel's eventual full release. She would live in a supervised setting, initially attend mandatory counseling, and work to repay what she could of the financial damage she had caused. Standing up for truth cost us all dearly, but it also freed us from patterns that had imprisoned us long before Rachel ever saw the inside of a cell. Sometimes family love means having the courage to break destructive cycles, even when it breaks your heart in the process. What would you do if faced with a similar choice between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt someone you love, but was necessary? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that true integrity often comes with a price, but in the end, it's always worth it.